As I think you obviously know, the particular focus of this session is to look at the relationship between welfare and broader economic issues. And obviously how our economy performs is extremely important in terms of its ability to sustain the kind of quality of welfare programs that we as a country want and that we're here to talk about. But it's also, of course, what underpins our standard of living and our hope to improve that standard of living for everyone, and, of course, our employment opportunities. Now, our current government, as you know, has set ambitious goals for growing the economy, matching per capita incomes in Australia by 2025, and to stop that suction effect that Natalie Jackson was talking about. So there are some obvious connections between these economic growth goals and our desire to have adequate, effective welfare programs. One of these, of course, is to achieve in order to achieve strong levels of economic growth, we need high levels of workforce participation, with as many people as possible who want to work to be able to do so and to lead productive lives, as well, of course, as contributing to our economic outputs. Another is that welfare is a substantial component of government spending. And as we've already heard, governments are going to be under real constraints in the coming decades as we face the higher costs of health and super associated with us baby boomers moving up out there and becoming a liability for everybody else. So it's a pretty important topic, and we're very lucky to have a couple of serious experts here with us today. So I'll just introduce first up Paul Rodway from the Treasury. He's a principal advisor on macro policy at the Treasury. He describes himself as an early baby boomer. I don't know whether that makes you older than me or... but we probably won't find that out. He's worked on both long-term fiscal reports, the first one published in 2006, and the most recent Challenges and Choices, which was published in October last year. He's an economist by training, joining the Treasury in 1992 after a 19-year OE in Canada. I don't know what he did during that, but I'm sure it'll add value to what he has to say. So please welcome Paul Rodway.
What I'm intending to do today is to talk about why we look ahead several decades, our fiscal position. This may be a little bit too getting and spending, but that's the focus of our long-term fiscal report. It looks at the long-term fiscal challenges that we're facing, and we called it Challenges and Choices because it's all about balancing off what we want and what we've got. And maybe what we have now is not what's going to work in the future. And the reason we put it out there is not because it's a pile of policy advice for the government, but it's to generate debate about the trade-offs we face, what governments and individuals want in the future. The welfare is an important part of this, and it may help or hinder our way forward. Oh, that was quick. Goodness. Back. Right. The framework that we're dealing with here is the Public Finance Act and the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Those pieces of legislation were combined in 2004, and they increased the horizons which governments looked ahead. I remember when I first came back from Canada, we used to publish a single-year budget. It was just a little glance ahead, and then it went out 5 years, and then it went out with what's it going to be like over 15 years from now, and how is debt wobbling around way out there, and now with this longer-term statements that we're required to produce, we're looking right out 40 years. Now that's to capture the effects of population on all the other things that are going on. Of course it's ridiculous, isn't it, doing a 40-year projection. We can't even tell what we're going to be doing in a year, and it's all a bit wobbly out there. At 40 years, somehow it gets a little bit safer because we're in a demographic world, and we're doing projections, we're making simple assumptions about where things are trending, and somehow that seems a firmer basis than trying to anticipate the wobbles in the near term. So it's big picture stuff, and it's a way of we don't do these forecasts because they're going to be right. We're doing them now to look into the future, to help us make decisions now, which will prevent the forecast from happening. So it's a sort of a weird world that we live in. So a little bit of fiscal background. There's a volcano there of debt that started out in this particular framework from 1970, where we peaked at 55% around the recession of 1990, 91, 92, and then through the use of the fiscal responsibility machinery of saying this is where we want to head, and good fortune, lots of growth in the economy, we were able to bring that mountain of the debt down. Just a couple of pegs that we should add to that is that after the war, the net debt was somewhere between 100 and 120%, perhaps. It's hard to get the numbers right from way back. GDP is different and debt's different. But 100 and 120% was where we were just after the war, let's say. And Greece is being caned at present for having net debt of 100%, or just underneath that. So there's a couple of little pegs to keep in your head when we look ahead here. I won't talk about that one. Well, a little bit. In 1970, we had 25% of the GDP of the economy was government spending. That rose through 1990 with the recession and all the changes that went on to just over 40%. And then we came down to about 30%, and with the slowdown recently, it's climbed again. So we wobble around, but we're still in between those two peaks and troughs, so that's good. So we're asked to do this long-term fiscal report. It explores future taxes, spending, and government debt under current policy setting. Now, current policy settings is a bit of an elusive creature, as you'll see when we just talk about them. What is actually current policy? I'll talk about a bit about that later on. These kinds of reports, looking out into the future, worrying about how demography out there is going to interact with getting and spending by the government, these reports are done by all the OECD countries and APEC countries, a lot of the APEC countries. And the Australians call it their intergenerational report because it deals with how much, as time goes on, the proportions of the population who are over 65 and those who are under 15 change. And that has intergenerational implications. If you're making debt rise now, it'll be paid for by your children. And so there's an intergenerational effect on this as well. I better get a move on. So there's the report. We're asked to do this every 4 years or so. Look out 40 years. It's a projection. It's not a forecast. We're doing simple sort of line things here. We're not interacting everything, and we put it out not as this is what the government should do, but just this is a warning. It's a warning that things are changing, and we should be aware that these changes might go in the way that we're talking about. So there's our. If we just take the economy like a clock and wind it up and use current policy as best we can, and if we don't have any good guides from current policy, we use historic trends, we call it the historic trend projection, then we start in a deficit, thanks to the global recession and our own one, and it continues all the way out if we just let things drift on and let population interact with the spending. And so that gives you that orange line surging up there, and the difference between that and revenue, which we've got a very simple, almost flat revenue path there, allowing a little bit of fiscal drag and then dropping the revenue a little bit. The fiscal drag is where the tax to GDP ratio climbs up because incomes are growing and you've got a tax scale that rises, so it just lifts it up a bit. So yes, we get a deficit, and if you have a deficit and it goes on and on, big lesson, if as you do with a credit card, if you're in deficit, and it starts to feed on itself, and eventually it looks like that.